Phaedo, were you in the prison with Socrates on the day he drank the poison? Or did you hear about it from someone else?
I was there, Socrates.
What did he say in his final hours? How did he die? I'd like to find out about it. Now, we heard that he died by drinking poison, but nobody knew anything more than that. No Phliasian ever goes to Athens. It's been a long time since any Athenian has come to Phlius.
You did not hear about the trial and the accusations?
Oh, someone told us about the trial, but we were surprised that even though Socrates had been condemned, he was not executed until much later. What was the reason for that, Phaedo?
It happened by chance, Socrates. Just the day before Socrates' trial began, they crowned the stern of the ship the Athenians sent to Delos.
Which ship?
The ship in which, the Athenians say, Theseus sailed to Crete, when he took 14 young people, 7 males and 7 females, with him, and then saved their lives as well as his own. They had vowed to Apollo that if they were saved, they would make an annual pilgrimage to Delos. This custom still continues, so the entire time of the voyage to and from Delos is a holy season. During that period, public executions are forbidden so that the city will remain pure. If the ship is detained by an unfavorable wind, the trip may take a long time. As I was saying, the pilgrimage begins when the priest of Apollo crowns the stern of the ship, and this happened on the day before the trial. That is why Socrates had to spend time in prison and was not put to death until long after he was sentenced.
Tell us about his death, Phaedo. What was said and done? Which of his friends were there, or did the authorities forbid them to be present? Did he die alone?
Not at all. Several, actually quite a few of his friends were with him.
Try to give us a complete account of what happened, unless you have something else you must do.
I have plenty of time, so I will try to tell you everything about it. Nothing pleases me more than to remember Socrates, whether I am talking about him myself or listening to someone else speak about him.
Your listeners feel the same way, Phaedo. So please, tell us everything as fully and accurately as you can.
I felt quite strange being at his side, Socrates. I could hardly believe that I was present at the death of a close friend, and yet did not feel sorry for him. His behavior and his words were so noble and fearless that he appeared to be happy at the end of his life. I felt he was going to Hades by divine providence, and that when he arrived he would do well, if anyone ever does well there. That is why I did not pity him, as would seem natural at such a time, nor did all of us feel the joy we usually experienced whenever we talked about a philosophical topic of such a kind. I felt a strange mixture of both pleasure and pain, knowing that Socrates was about to die. Everyone there shared that feeling, sometimes laughing and sometimes crying, especially Apollodorus. You know the sort of person he is.
Yes, I do.
He was quite overwhelmed. All of us were deeply moved.
Who else was there?
Among the native Athenians were Apollodorus, as I mentioned, and Critobulus, together with his father, Crito. Also Hermogenes, Epigenes, and Aeschines, Antisthenes. Then there was Ctesippus from the deme of Paeania, and Menexenus, and a few others. I think Plato was ill.
Were there any foreign visitors present?
Yes. From Thebes there was Simmias with Cebes and Phaedontes, and from Megara, Euclid and Terpsion.
How about Aristippus and Cleombrotus?
No, someone said they were in Aegina.
Was there anyone else?
I don't think so.
You mentioned a philosophical conversation. What did you talk about?
I will begin at the beginning and try to report the entire conversation. We were in the habit of meeting early in the morning at the court where the trial had been held. It is not far from the prison. It did not open very early, so we spent the time talking with each other. As soon as the prison doors were open, we went in and generally spent the rest of the day with him. That morning we had agreed to meet earlier than usual, because when we left the prison the day before, we heard that the sacred ship had arrived from Delos. When we got to the prison at the appointed time, the jailer who had always let us in came out and said to wait until he called us. He said, "They are taking off Socrates' chains and telling him how he will die today." After a while he returned and told us to go in. When we entered, Socrates had just been released from his chains, and Xantippe, you know Xantippe, was sitting next to him holding their small child. When she saw us, she cried out the way women customarily do. "Socrates, this is the last time you will speak with your friends, or they with you."
Crito, somebody should take her home.
As some of Crito's attendants led her away, she howled and beat herself. After she left, Socrates, who was sitting on the couch, bent over and began to rub his leg.
What people call pleasure is quite strange, and it is oddly related to pain, which is usually considered to be its opposite. They never come to us at the same time, but if we experience one, we are soon compelled to take the other, as if they were joined together with a single head. I think that if Aesop had noticed this, he would have made up a fable about how the god tried to reconcile their conflict and, unable to do so, fastened their heads together. That is why when one comes, the other tags along. Right now, I am feeling pleasure, but it follows the pain in my leg caused by the chain.
Socrates, I'm glad that you mentioned the name of Aesop. It reminds me of a question several people have posed about your writing of poetry. Just the other day, the poet Venus wanted to know why you, who never wrote a line of poetry, have been putting Aesop into verse and composing a hymn in honor of Apollo since you have been in prison. He will surely ask again, so if you want me to answer him, please tell me what I should say.
Cebes, tell him the truth. I do not intend to rival him or his poems. I know quite well that would be hard to do. I was trying to grasp the meaning of a certain dream I have had many times in my life and to protect myself from harm. In that dream, I have been told that I should follow the muses. The dream came to me in different forms, but the message was always the same. Socrates, create and practice the arts. I used to think that this was intended to encourage me to continue doing what I was doing, just as spectators cheer runners in a race, to practice philosophy, which is the greatest of the arts. But I was not sure about that. The dream might have meant the popular form of poetic creation. Since the festival of the god delayed my death sentence, I thought it would be safer to satisfy my doubts and obey the dream by creating some poetry before departing. So I made a hymn to honor Apollo, the god of the festival. But then I realized that a poet who is really a poet, a creator, should not merely put words together, but also tell a story. Since I'm not good at making up stories, I put some available fables of Aesop I knew into verse. Say that to Venus, and tell him farewell. Also say that if he is wise, he will follow me as soon as possible. As you know, the Athenians have commanded that I should go today.
What a message for a Venus, Socrates. I have spent a lot of time with him, and from what I know, he will never take such advice unless he is forced to do so.
Why, Simmias? Is Venus a lover of wisdom?
I think he is.
Then he will take my advice, as will all who seek a philosophical life. But they should not take their own life, since that is forbidden.
At this point, Socrates removed his legs from the couch and put his feet on the floor. He sat that way throughout the rest of the dialogue.
Socrates, how can you say that it's wrong to take your own life, but that a philosopher should be ready to follow someone who is dying?
Cebes, you and Simmias are students of Philolaus. Has he never talked to you about this?
He never spoke clearly about it.
I can only report what I have heard indirectly, but I am willing to share that. Since I'm about to leave this world, it is especially appropriate to think and talk of the nature of the journey I am about to take. What better use is there of the time between now and sunset?
Then tell me, Socrates, why is it wrong to commit suicide? Philolaus said the same thing when he was staying with us at Thebes, and I have heard other people say it as well, but I have never heard anyone explain it properly.
Then listen carefully, Cebes, and you might yet hear an explanation. I suppose you find it odd that this is the only exception to the rule that evil things might sometimes be good. Might not death be better than life in some cases? In cases when death is better than life, it seems strange that we are not allowed to benefit ourselves but must wait for someone else to do it.
It is strange.
I admit that it seems unreasonable, but perhaps it has some justification. I do not fully understand it, but the great mysteries secretly disclose that human beings are in a kind of prison and are forbidden to escape. Cebes, perhaps this makes sense if we think of the gods as our guardians and remember that we belong to them.
Yes, I suppose it does.
Would it not make you angry if something that belongs to you were to kill itself when you had given no indication that you wanted it to die? Would you not be tempted to punish it if you could?
Certainly.
Then it might be reasonable to say that people should not kill themselves unless some god indicates that it is necessary, as in my case.
Yes, Socrates, that seems to make sense. But how can you reconcile the view that we belong to a god who protects us with your claim that a lover of wisdom should be willing to die? It is not reasonable to say that the wisest people should be willing to abandon divine rule, which is clearly the best. Wise people do not think that. When they are free to do so, they can take better care of themselves than the god can. Perhaps a fool might think that, arguing that it is better to run away from a good master, ignoring the duty to remain as long as possible, and unaware that it makes no sense to run away from what is best. A wise person would choose to remain and be guided by someone who is better. Socrates, this is the opposite of what you just said. On this view, the wise person would grieve and the fool would rejoice in facing death.
I am delighted by the way Cebes is always ready to question and challenge an argument, and he is neither quickly nor easily convinced.
In this case, I think he raises a good objection. How can a truly wise person wish to escape from those who are better than they are? Socrates, I suspect that Cebes is referring to you. He thinks that you are too willing to run away from the gods, who you admit are good rulers.
Your objection is a fair one. I suppose you think I ought to answer it as if I were in court.
That is exactly what we want.
Then I will try to do a better job of convincing you than I did in defending myself before the judges. Simmias and Cebes, I admit that I ought to grieve over death if I were not persuaded that I am going to other gods who are wise and good. I am as certain of this as it is possible to be about such matters. I also hope that I will be with good people who are better than those I leave behind, though I am less sure of that. For this reason I do not feel sad. I hope that something awaits the dead, something far better for good people than for bad ones.
Socrates, do you intend to keep your opinions to yourself and take them with you? Will you not share your thoughts so that we too may participate in a benefit common to all of us? And if you succeed in convincing us, that will also serve as your defense.
I will do my best, but Crito has been trying to get my attention. I should first find out what he wants.
Only this, Socrates. The man who will give you the poison asked me to warn you that you should not talk too much. Talking increases body heat, and that interferes with the effect of the poison. People who become overly excited sometimes have to drink it 2 or 3 times.
That is his problem. Tell him to prepare 2 or even 3 doses if that is what it takes.
I was quite sure that that is what you would say, but he has been pestering me for some time.
Forget about him. Now, my judges, I will answer you and show that anyone who has lived as a true lover of wisdom has reason to be optimistic when facing death, and may hope to receive the greatest good in the other world. Simmias and Cebes, you wonder how this can be. I will try to explain. Other people do not realize that a genuine lover of wisdom is constantly studying death and dying. If that is true, then it would be strange for those who have been preparing for death throughout their lives to be upset when it actually arrives.
I know that this is no time for joking, but I cannot help laughing when I imagine what people will say when they hear this. Back home, they would say that the philosophical life is really a kind of death, so philosophers deserve to get what they want.
Simmias, they are right in saying that, except the part about understanding. They do not understand how a genuine lover of wisdom desires death, nor the sense in which a philosopher deserves death, nor what kind of death it is. But let's talk among ourselves and ignore them. Do we believe there is such a thing as death?
Of course.
Is death anything other than the separation of soul and body? When we die, the soul exists by itself apart from the body, and the body exists by itself apart from the soul. Is that what we believe? Or do you think that death is something else?
No, that is what we believe.
Consider carefully whether you agree with me or not, because how you answer this question will throw some light on our subject. Do you believe that lovers of wisdom ought to care about the alleged pleasures, such as eating and drinking?
As little as possible, Socrates.
What about sexual pleasure?
Not at all.
Will lovers of wisdom think much about other ways of serving the body, such as buying expensive clothes, footwear, and jewelry? Will they care about them or despise anything more than nature requires? What do you say, Simmias?
I think true lovers of wisdom would despise such things.
Would you say that as far as possible they ignore the body and are concerned primarily with soul?
Yes, I would say that.
This shows that philosophers more than other people try to free the soul from the body.
That's right.
But the rest of the world thinks that a life without bodily pleasures is not worth living. They would say that a person who does not care about such pleasures might as well be dead.
What you say about them is true, Socrates.
What should we say about seeking wisdom? If the body is invited to join in the search, does it help or get in the way? Do seeing and hearing lead us to truth? Or are seeing and hearing always inaccurate, as the poets keep telling us? But if seeing and hearing are vague and imprecise, we cannot trust the other senses, which are surely inferior to them. Do you agree?
I do agree.
When does the soul grasp the truth? It is deceived when it tries to examine anything only by means of the body.
True.
Then if reality is to be displayed at all, it must be in thinking.
Yes.
And would you say that thinking is at its best when it is by itself, not distracted by sights, sounds, pains, or pleasures, when it has as little as possible to do with the body and its activities and is seeking reality?
Yes, I would say that.
When they are thinking, lovers of wisdom have little respect for the body. Their soul avoids the body and strives to be alone.
That's true.
Simmias, please tell me, is there something we might call justice itself?
Of course there is.
Is there beauty itself and goodness itself?
Definitely.
Have you ever seen such things with your eyes?
Never.
Have you grasped them with any of the other bodily senses? I'm also asking about greatness, health, and strength. In other words, about how we reach the essence of anything. Have you observed the true nature of anything with your body alone? Or, on the contrary, do we come closest to knowing when we strive for the essence of what we investigate?
Certainly.
We achieve this best when we approach our task with thought alone, not with sight or by the aid of any other bodily sense that would obstruct thinking, but by penetrating to the thing itself with the light of the mind. We try to eliminate, as far as possible, the eyes, ears, and the rest of the body because they only interfere and hinder the soul from acquiring wisdom. Simmias, is this not the kind of person who is most likely to reach reality?
Socrates, you have expressed a marvelous truth.
All of this leads genuine lovers of wisdom to share with each other something like the following opinion. We have found a path that takes us straight to the conclusion that as long as we have a body, and reasoning by the soul is mingled with it and fouled by it, our passion for truth will never be satisfied. The body is a source of endless trouble by its constant need for food and by diseases that disable us and impede our quest for reality. It also fills us with desires, passions, fears, and illusions, all kinds of nonsense. The body makes it impossible for us to have a single serious thought. What is the source of war, battles, and discord? Where but from the body and its lusts? War stems from the love of property and money, and we need them for the sake of serving the body. As a result, we have no time to pursue philosophy. Even when we find time to pursue an idea, the body introduces disorder, confusion, and fear that prevent us from seeing the truth. It appears that if we intend to acquire pure knowledge, we must release ourselves from the body. The soul itself must see the things themselves. Only then will we be able to acquire what we most desire: wisdom, the object of our love. As the argument shows, that can happen only after death, not while we are still alive. If the soul cannot have pure knowledge while the body accompanies it, we are left with only two alternatives. Either we cannot know at all, or it must happen after death. Only then will the soul exist alone, without the intrusion of the body. As long as we are alive, it seems we will only come closest to knowing when we have the least possible interest in the body and are not infected by it, purifying ourselves until the God releases us. Then the foolishness of the body will be cleared away. We will be pure and may accompany other pure souls in knowing the truth. For no impure thing is allowed to approach the pure. Simmias, these are the kinds of words that true lovers of wisdom cannot help believing and saying to each other. Do you agree with me about that?
I certainly do, Socrates.
If this is true, my friend, then I can hope that where I am going, there if anywhere, I will obtain what you and I have taken as our primary goal throughout our lives. Now that the time for my departure has been set, I leave with good expectations. This is true not only for me, but for all who think that their mind has been purified.
Of course.
What is purification but separating the soul from the body, as we said earlier in this conversation? The soul develops the habit of gathering and collecting itself in every possible way apart from the body, dwelling by itself in this life and in the future, free from the chains of the body.
True.
Then, do you agree that what we call death is precisely this separation and release of the soul from the body?
Certainly.
Genuine lovers of wisdom, and they alone, study how to release the soul from the body. And they are eager to reach that goal. Is that not their specialty?
Yes.
As I said in the beginning, it would be ridiculous for someone to learn to live as closely as possible in the state of death and then be angry when it comes.
Of course it would.
Simmias, because true lovers of wisdom have been preparing for death, To them, of all people, death is the least terrible. Look at it this way. They have always been enemies of the body, and have been eager only to have the soul. So it would be irrational for them to be frightened and angry rather than rejoicing at their departure to the place where, when they arrive, they hope to leave their enemy behind and to obtain the wisdom they have desired throughout their life. Many people have been willing to go to Hades in the hope of seeing and being with a lover, a spouse, or a beloved child. Why would a genuine lover of wisdom, convinced that it can be obtained only in Hades, be upset by the prospect of death and not be happy to go there? A true philosopher would depart gladly, convinced that there alone it is possible to find pure wisdom. Assuming this is true, it would be absurd to fear death.
It would indeed.
And when you see someone who is angry about having to die, it is a sure sign that this person was not a lover of wisdom, but loved the body and probably loved money and honors as well.
That's true.
Could we also say that lovers of wisdom are likely to possess the quality we call courage?
Definitely.
Consider moderation, Simmias. Would you say that the ability to rule over our passions, what most people call self-control, is proper to someone who ignores the body and lives a philosophical life?
I must agree, Socrates.
When you think about courage and moderation in other people, they seem to be out of place.
What do you mean?
You are aware that most people consider death to be something bad.
Of course.
When they are courageous, they choose to die because they are afraid of something even worse.
Yes.
Then everybody except a lover of wisdom is courageous only through fear. But isn't it strange to say that someone is brave only because of fear? In other words, because of cowardice?
That's right.
Would they not be moderate for the same reason? They control themselves because they lack self-control. That seems to be a contradiction, but when you think about it, that is how it is with this kind of restraint. They are afraid of losing certain pleasures they crave, so they abstain from one kind of pleasure because they are dominated by another kind. Being immoderate means to be ruled by pleasures, but such people rule over some pleasures only because other pleasures rule them. That is what I mean when I say that they become moderate by being immoderate.
That makes sense.
Simmias, my friend, exchanging one fear or one pleasure or one pain for another fear or pleasure or pain, treating them like coins, does not seem to be the appropriate way to purchase goodness. There is only one true currency for such exchange, and that is thinking. In exchange for it alone can genuine courage, moderation, and justice be bought and sold. Only when we think can we have true goodness, regardless of whether fears or pleasures or anything else that is good or bad is present or absent. Goodness that is made up of these goods, when they are severed from thinking and exchanged with each other, is really only a shadow of goodness, slavish, sick, and false. In the true exchange, thinking, moderation, and justice, which are a kind of catharsis, purify these evils. Long ago, the founders of the sacred mysteries were quite serious when they spoke in riddles, indicating that those who enter Hades unsanctified and uninitiated will wallow in the muck, whereas those who have been initiated and purified will dwell with the gods. In the words of a poet, many are the thyrsus bearers, but the priests of Bacchus few. I think that the priests of Bacchus are those who have genuinely sought wisdom. Throughout my life and to the best of my ability, I have eagerly sought to become one of them. Whether I have searched in the right way and succeeded in my quest, I will soon know when I arrive there, if the god wishes. Now, Simmias and Cebes, I have defended myself against those who accuse me of not grieving or being angry as I part from you and my masters in this world. I believe that I am right because I will find other good friends and masters there. If my defense has more success with you than did my words with the Athenian judges, all will be well.
Socrates, what you have said was beautifully phrased, and I agree with you. But people will doubt what you have said about the soul. They fear that when the soul leaves the body, it might be nowhere. On the day we die, it might be destroyed and cease to exist. Once it is released from the body, it might dissipate like smoke or breath and vanish into nothingness. If the soul could hold together and exist by itself after being released from the ills of the body, as you just recounted, there would be good reason to hope that what you say is true. But considerable persuasion and many arguments are needed to prove that when a person dies, the soul continues to exist and retains power and mind.
Cebes, you are right. But how should we proceed? Would you like to talk about the probability of such things?
Yes, certainly. I would like to hear your opinion.
Well, I suppose anyone who heard me just now, even a comic poet, could not accuse me of idly talking about matters that do not concern me. So, if you all agree, let us examine the matter carefully. The question is whether or not the souls of people who have died are in Hades. The ancient myth I have been recounting says that souls go from here to there and then return, being born again from the dead. If this is true, then the living come from the dead. So our souls must exist there. Otherwise, how could they be born again? This would be conclusive if we could establish that those who are living are only born from the dead. But if this cannot be proved, some other arguments will have to be found.
That's true.
We should consider this matter not only in relation to human beings, but also as it relates to other animals and to plants, to everything that is generated. Can we say that everything that has an opposite is generated out of its opposite? Consider the beautiful and the ugly, the just and the unjust, and all kinds of other opposites. Is this always the case? Just as something larger becomes larger after having been smaller?
That does seem to be how it is.
And what is smaller was once larger before it became smaller?
Yes,
Is the weaker generated from the stronger and the faster from the slower?
that's right.
Does the worse come from the better and the just come from the unjust?
Certainly.
Is this true of all opposites? Are we convinced that all of them are generated out of their opposites?
Yes.
In this interaction of opposites, are there not two intermediate processes that are always taking place, going from one to the other and then back again? For example, when there is a larger and a smaller, there is also an intermediate process of increase and decrease. So we say one waxes and the other one wanes.
That's true.
Many other processes, such as dividing and composing, cooling and heating, also involve passing into or out of each other. Should we say that this holds for all opposites, even if they are not expressed in words? They are generated out of one another, which involves a process of going from one to the other?
Yes, we should say that.
Now, is there an opposite of life, just as sleeping is the opposite of being awake?
There is
What do we call that?
death.
Then, if they are opposites, they are generated out of each other and also contain two intermediate processes.
Of course.
Cebes, I will examine one of these pairs of opposites along with its intermediate processes, and then I would like you to consider the other pair. Sleeping is opposed to being awake. Being awake is generated out of being asleep, and being asleep is generated out of being awake. The process of generation in one case is going to sleep, and in the other case it is waking up. Have I explained this correctly or not?
You have explained it perfectly.
Now, it is your turn to analyze life and death in the same way. Is death the opposite of life?
Certainly.
Are they generated from each other?
Yes.
What is generated from life?
Death.
And from death?
I have to say life.
Then, Cebes, would you say that the living, whether things or persons, is generated from the dead?
That seems to follow.
Then our souls previously existed in Hades.
Yes, Socrates, that follows.
So, one of the two processes of generation is clear. The act of dying.
It is quite clear.
How should we proceed further? Because nature does not hop around on one leg, may we infer that there is another process, one that is the opposite of dying?
We may.
What is that process?
Coming back to life?
If there is such a process as coming back to life, it must involve the birth of the dead into the world of the living. Is that true?
Quite true.
Cebes, this is how we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living. If this is true, then we have proved that the souls of the dead must be some place out of which they can come back to life.
Yes, Socrates, this necessarily follows from what we previously agreed.
I think that there is another way we can show that we were right. If generation only took place in a straight line, without the balancing circle by which nature moves from opposite to opposite and back again, then everything would eventually arrive at the same state and have the same form. Generation itself would stop.
What do you mean?
Nothing difficult, as you can see from the story of Endymion, who was granted eternal sleep by Zeus. That story would have no meaning unless sleeping and waking were constantly replacing each other. Without that balance, everything would always remain asleep. Similarly, if all things were combined and no substance is distinct from the rest, then the chaos described by Anaxagoras would result. Similarly, if all things that participated in life were to die and always remain dead, never coming back to life, how could we avoid everything being dead and nothing alive? If the living spring from any other living beings that also eventually die, must not everything be swallowed up by death?
There is no way to escape that conclusion, Socrates. I think what you say is entirely true.
Yes, Cebes, it is true. We were not deceived when we agreed that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of those who have died exist.
Socrates, if the maxim you often cited is true, that learning is recollection, that implies a previous time in which we learned what we now recollect. That would be impossible unless the soul were somewhere before existing in human form. So this is another proof that the soul is immortal.
Cebes, what previous proof do you have in mind? I don't remember right now, so you'll have to remind me.
The one excellent proof that comes from questioning. If you interrogate people in the right way, they will come up with the correct answer on their own. How could they do that unless knowledge and right reason were not already in them? This can be clearly demonstrated if you produce a geometrical figure or something else of that kind.
Simmias, if you are still not persuaded, let me ask whether you agree when you look at it another way. You still doubt that learning is recollection, don't you?
It is not that I doubt it, but I need to do just what we were talking about, to recollect. From what Cebes just said, I am beginning to remember and to be convinced, but I would like to hear what you were about to say.
I was going to ask you a question. Do we agree that in order to remember, you must have known before?
Certainly.
Do we also agree that when knowledge comes in this way, it is by recollecting? I mean, when you have seen or heard or otherwise perceived anything, you know not only that thing, but also something else that comes by a different kind of knowing. Then you recollect what comes to mind. Do you agree?
I don't know what you mean, Socrates.
I'll give you an example. Would you agree that knowing a musical instrument such as a lyre is different from knowing a person?
Of course I would.
Now, consider the case of lovers who recognize a lyre or a piece of clothing or anything else that belongs to the person they love. When they look at the lyre, they have an idea of the person who plays it. This is recollection. In the same way, anyone who sees Simmias is likely to remember Cebes. We could think of countless other examples.
Yes, we have all kinds of such thoughts.
This is the sort of thing we mean by recollection. It often involves the process of recovering something we have forgotten over time and through inattention.
True.
By seeing a picture of a horse or a lyre, can you remember a person? From a picture of Simmias, is it possible to remember Cebes?
It is.
From a picture of Simmias, can we also recollect Simmias himself?
Yes, of course we can.
In all of these cases, the recollection can either be caused by things that are alike or by things that are not alike.
That's right.
When the recollection is caused by something like it, then it necessarily gives rise to another question, whether the likeness is in any way defective.
That is inevitable.
Now, consider this question. Can we say that equality exists? I do not mean the equality of two pieces of wood or of two stones, but equality itself.
Yes, we can say that with great confidence.
Do we know what it is?
Of course we do.
Where did we get this knowledge? Does it come from the things we just mentioned? By looking at equal pieces of wood or equal stones, did we come to think of equality itself, which is quite different from them? Look at it this way. The same pieces of wood or stone sometimes appear to us to be equal, but at other times appear to be unequal. Is that true?
It is undeniable.
Are true equals ever unequal? Is equality ever the same as inequality?
Never, Socrates.
Then these so-called equals are not the same as equality itself.
Clearly not.
And yet, from these equal things that differ from equality itself, you come to think of equality itself.
Yes.
And equality might be like those things or unlike them.
Yes.
It makes no difference whether they are alike or unlike. If you see one thing and think something else, that is clearly an act of recollection.
True.
What would you say about equal pieces of wood or equal stones? Are they equals in the same sense of equality itself, or are they defective in some way?
They are definitely defective.
Then do we agree that when we look at any object and realize that it aims at being something else but falls short of it and cannot actually be it, we must have had previous knowledge of whatever it resembles but to which it is inferior?
Yes, Socrates, we do agree about that.
Is this what we just encountered concerning equal things and equality itself?
Precisely.
Then we must have known equality itself before we first saw equal things and realized that these alleged equals aim at equality itself but fall short of it.
That must be true.
But we also agree that we did not realize this. We could not realize it except through seeing or touching or any other sense experience. In this respect, all of our senses are the same.
Socrates, they are all alike as they relate to this argument.
So, it is by means of the senses that we derive the knowledge that all sensible things aim at the idea of equality itself, but that they fall short of it. Is that true?
That conclusion follows from what we said before.
Did we begin to see and hear and possess our other senses when we were born?
We did.
Then we must have acquired the knowledge of equality itself before then.
Yes.
Before we were born?
Yes.
Now, if we acquired this knowledge before we were born and had it when we were born, that means we knew not only the ideas of equality, larger and smaller, but all other such ideas as well. Our reasoning applies to beauty itself, goodness itself, justice itself, holiness itself, and every other form we stamp with the seal of being itself as we go through the dialectical process of questioning and answering. So, we must have come to know them before we were born.
That is true.
Once we have acquired knowledge and do not forget it, we must have been born with it and will continue to have it throughout our life. To know is to acquire and retain knowledge and not forget it. Simmias, can we say that forgetting is simply the losing of knowledge?
Yes, Socrates, we can say that.
But if we acquire knowledge before birth and lose it when we are born, and if by using the senses we recover what we previously knew, what we call learning is the process of recovering our knowledge. Is it right to call this recollection?
It is.
As we just made clear, when we perceive something, either with the help of seeing, hearing, or some other sense, it is not difficult to think of something else, either like it or unlike it, that had been forgotten and yet was associated with it. As I said, one of the following alternatives is true. Either we had this knowledge at birth and continue to know it throughout life, or those who we say learn later, after they are born, only remember. So, learning is recollection.
I agree.
Simmias, which of these alternatives do you prefer? Were we born with this knowledge, or did we later remember what we knew prior to our birth?
Socrates, I cannot decide right now.
Well, can you decide about this? When people know, should they be able to provide a reason for what they know?
They must be able to provide a reason.
Do you think that everyone can give a reason concerning the things we were just talking about?
I wish they could, Socrates, but I fear that by this time tomorrow there will be no one left who is able to give a reason worth having.
Then do you not think that everyone knows these things?
That's right.
Then they are in the process of recollecting what they knew before?
That must be how it is.
But when did our souls acquire this knowledge? Was it after we were born as human beings?
Definitely not.
Then it must have been before we were born.
Yes.
Then, Simmias, our souls must have existed before they were in human form. They must have been without bodies and with intelligence.
The only other possibility is that these ideas were given to us at the moment of birth. We have not discussed that moment.
Then when did we lose them? We have agreed that we were not born knowing them. Did we lose them at the moment we received them, or do you have some other time in mind?
No, Socrates. I guess I was talking nonsense without knowing it.
Then, Simmias, may we say, as we often do, that beauty, goodness, and other essences are real, and it is to them that we refer all our sensations. We now realize that these essences existed previously in us, which means that our souls must also have existed before we were born. If not, our argument lacks force. We cannot doubt that if these essences existed before we were born, then our souls must have existed before we were born. But if the essences did not exist, then our souls did not exist.
Yes, Socrates, I am convinced that it is equally necessary that our souls and these essences you are talking about existed before our birth. Fortunately, your argument supports my own belief. Nothing is as clear to me now as that beauty, goodness, and the other essences you mentioned really exist. I am satisfied with this proof. Yes, Socrates, I am convinced that it is equally necessary that our souls and these essences you are talking about existed before our birth. Fortunately, your argument supports my own belief. Nothing is as clear to me now as that beauty, goodness, and the other essences you mentioned really exist. I am satisfied with this proof.
Is Cebes equally satisfied? I must convince him as well.
Although Cebes is the most skeptical person I know and the most difficult to persuade by an argument, I think he is now convinced that the soul existed before birth. But you have not yet proved, even to me, that the soul will continue to exist after death. I cannot yet reject the opinion that many people have, to which Cebes referred earlier, that when a person dies, the soul is dispersed and ceases to exist. Even if we accept that it was created in some other place and existed before it entered the human body, how do we know that once it goes out, it may not be destroyed and come to an end?
That's right, Simmias. That the soul existed before we were born was the first half of the argument, and this seems to have been proved. But that the soul will exist after death is the other half that is still missing and needs to be provided.
Simmias and Cebes, that has already been established. When you put these two arguments together, this one about essences and the first one about everything living coming from the dead, the proof is complete. If the soul existed before birth, then it can only be born and come into this life from what was dead. It necessarily continues to exist even after death, so it can be born again. Cebes, the proof you want has already been given. But I suppose that you and Simmias would like to explore the argument more fully. Like children, you are haunted by the fear that when the soul leaves the body, a wind might blow it away and scatter it, especially if one happens to die in stormy weather rather than when it is calm.
Then, Socrates, you must argue us out of our fears. Do not think we are afraid, but rather that there is a child inside of us for whom death is a kind of boogeyman. We must try to persuade that child not to be afraid when alone and in the dark.
Then you must sing a charm every day until you have charmed away your fear.
But where will we find a good singer of charms when you are gone, Socrates?
Greece is a large place, Cebes, with many good people, and many foreign lands exist. Look for such a singer among all of them, far and wide, sparing neither effort nor money, for there is no better way of using your wealth. You should also search among yourselves, perhaps the most likely place to find what you are seeking.
We will make the search. But now, if you are willing, please return to the place where we left the argument.
Of course I'm willing.
Good.
We should ask ourselves a question such as this one. What is it that we think is liable to be dispersed and scattered to the winds? What kind of thing should we fear might be destroyed? And about what sort of thing should we have no such fear? Then we should proceed to ask about the nature of the soul. Our hopes and fears about our own souls will depend on how we answer those questions.
That is a good way to approach the matter.
We can assume that anything that is put together out of parts can naturally be dissolved and scattered. But whatever is uncompounded cannot be dissolved into parts.
That makes sense.
If something is uncompounded, it will be the same and unchanging. But whatever is compound is always changing and never the same. Do you agree?
I do.
Now, let's return to what we considered earlier. The essence says that our dialectical process revealed as true existence. Whether we are talking about equality itself, beauty itself, or any other essence, are they the kind of things that are liable to change? Or are they always what they are, with the same simple, self-existent, and unchanging forms, never admitting a variation at all, not in any way or at any time?
Socrates, they must always be the same.
Then what would you say about the many beautiful things, whether people, horses, articles of clothing, or anything else that may be called equal or beautiful? Are they unchanging and always the same, or are they just the opposite? Can we describe them as almost always changing and hardly ever the same, whether we consider them alone or in relation to each other?
They are always in the process of changing.
These are the kinds of things you can touch and see and perceive with the other senses. But what is unchanging can only be thought with the mind. It is invisible and cannot be seen.
What you say is true.
Shall we assume that existence takes two forms, one that is visible and the other that is invisible?
Yes, let's assume that.
The visible form changes, but the invisible form does not.
Yes, we can also assume that.
We human beings consist of both body and soul.
We do?
To which form of existence is the body more alike and akin?
Clearly to the visible.
And is the soul visible?
Not to human beings.
By seen and not seen, we mean what is or is not visible to the human eye.
Yes, to the human eye.
What do we say about the soul? Is it seen or not seen?
Not seen.
Then it is invisible.
Yes.
Then the soul is more like what is invisible, and the body more like what is visible.
That is certain.
Did we not say long ago that when the soul uses the body as a means of perception, in other words, when it uses sight or hearing or some other sense, perceiving through the body means perceiving through the senses, then the soul is dragged by the body to the region of the changeable, where it wanders around and is confused and dizzy, and where the world spins around the soul as if it were drunk.
How true.
But when it inquires by itself, it contemplates what is most like itself in the pure region of what is eternal, unchanging, and immortal. Then it can rest from wandering on the wrong paths and commune with what never changes. Is this not what we call thinking?
Yes, Socrates. What you say is beautiful and true.
Based on what you previously said and on what you are now saying, which of these do you think the soul resembles?
Socrates, I think that everyone who can follow the argument, including the slowest learner, would agree that the soul is like the eternal and unchanging.
What about the body?
It is constantly changing.
Now, let's look at the matter this way. When the soul and the body are together, one naturally rules and governs, and the other naturally serves and obeys. Which one is more like the divine, and which is more like the mortal? Would you say that what is divine naturally rules and governs, and that what is mortal serves and obeys?
Yes, I would say that.
Which one does the soul resemble?
Socrates, it is obvious that the soul resembles the divine, and the body resembles the mortal.
If that is so, CBs, consider this conclusion based on everything we have just said. The soul matches what is divine, immortal, intelligible, and uniform, whereas the body is like what is human, mortal, unintelligible, multiform, dissolvable, and changing. CBs, have we said anything that would deny this?
We have not.
Then the body is inclined to dissolve quickly, but the soul is almost indissoluble.
True.
Also, consider that when a person dies, the visible part, the body, which we call corpse, remains in the visible realm. But even though it naturally dissolves and decomposes, it does not do that immediately, but may remain for a long time, especially if it is in good condition and in the right season. If the body is dried and embalmed, as is the custom in Egypt, it may remain intact indefinitely. Even when the body decays, some parts, such as the bones and ligaments, are practically indestructible. Do you agree?
I do.
Should we think that the soul is blown away and perishes as soon as it leaves the body, as some people say? Can this be true of the invisible soul as it passes to the good and wise God, the true Hades, who is also invisible and pure, to whom, if the God is willing, My soul will soon go. My dear Simmias and Cebes, how could that be true? No, the truth is more like this. If the soul is pure and carries with it nothing from the body, it never voluntarily associated with the body, but withdrew into itself and focused on itself as its primary activity. This means that it has pursued the genuine love of wisdom and calmly prepared for death. Is this not how philosophers practice dying?
It is.
The soul, which is invisible, departs to the invisible realm that is like itself, divine, immortal, and wise. There it dwells forever, happy in the company of gods, as they say of those who have been initiated into the mysteries, freed from error and released from the foolishness, fears, wild passions, and other evils that plague human beings. Cebes, is this not true?
I have no doubt about it.
But what if the soul, when it is freed from the body, is polluted and has not been cleansed because it has always been the companion and servant of the body and is infatuated with and fascinated by the desires and pleasures of the body, so that it comes to believe that the truth only exists in bodily form, that we may touch and see and drink and eat and use for sexual pleasure? If the soul has grown accustomed to hate and fear by avoiding what is hidden and invisible to the bodily eye and can only be understood by philosophy, do you think that such a soul can escape in its pure form?
That would be impossible.
The soul is held tight by the corporeal, the natural result of continual association with the constant concern for the body.
How true.
My friend, we should think of the corporeal as heavy, oppressive, earthy, and visible. It weighs down such a soul, is afraid of the invisible domain of Hades, and drags the soul back to the visible realm. There it prowls around graves and tombstones where some people say they have seen the ghosts of such souls, which remain visible because they have not yet been cleansed and freed from earthly matter.
That seems likely.
Yes, it does, Cebes. These must be the souls of base and thoughtless people, not of good ones. They are forced to wander around such places to pay the penalty for their vile way of life. They continue to wander in this way until the corporeal desire that haunts them once again imprisons them in a body. We can suppose that they will be trapped in the same sort of character they embraced in their former life.
What sort of character do you mean, Socrates?
I mean people who have adopted gluttony, wantonness, or drunkenness rather than trying to avoid them. They are likely to become donkeys or wild animals of some sort. Do you agree?
Yes, that will probably happen to them.
And those who have chosen injustice, tyranny, and violence will become wolves, hawks, and vultures. Where else could they go?
That is a proper place for characters of that sort.
So we have no difficulty imagining where each of them would go, based on the kind of life they'd have led.
No difficulty at all.
And I suppose that the people who are happiest and end up in the best place are ordinary citizens who have acquired the civil and social virtues called moderation and justice, which develop by habit and practice rather than by philosophy and thinking.
Why are they the happiest?
Because they are likely to acquire a gentle social character like that of bees, wasps, and ants. They might even take on human form so that just and moderate people can again be generated from them.
That makes sense.
Only those who loved wisdom and who are cleansed and pure when they depart are allowed to join the gods. Simmias and Cebes, this is why genuine philosophers refuse to surrender to bodily passions and why they try to avoid them. Not because they fear poverty or the loss of their wealth, as do most people who love money. Nor do they refrain because they dread disgrace or a bad reputation, as do those who love honors and power.
No, Socrates, that would not suit them.
Definitely not, Cebes. Those who take care of their soul and do not live to mold and fashion the body say goodbye to all that. and they will not follow those who walk blindly. When philosophy offers to purify them and free them, they do not resist, but follow wherever it leads.
What do you mean, Socrates?
I will tell you. When philosophy first takes hold of them, those who are really fond of knowing realize that they are stuck to their bodies. Their soul is forced to view reality indirectly through prison bars and flounders in ignorance. Philosophy sees how the soul imposes its imprisonment on itself through its own passions and desires. Those who truly cherish knowing understand that the soul was in this terrible condition when philosophy took hold of it and gently encouraged it, seeking to release it. It points out that the eye, the ear, and the other senses deceive us, persuading the soul to avoid using them except when necessary. Philosophy encourages the soul to collect itself and concentrate only on itself, trusting only its own thinking about reality and not what comes to it by other means and is constantly changing in different contexts. What is visible and perceivable must yield to what is invisible and thinkable. The soul of the true philosopher understands that it should not resist this rescue, so it avoids desires, pleasures, anger, and fear as much as possible, concluding that when a person experiences great delights or sorrow or fear or desire, the suffering that results is not the kind of evil that we might expect, the loss of health or wealth through lust, but an even greater one, the worst of all. That is seldom taken into account.
What evil do you have in mind, Socrates?
I mean the general tendency to consider objects that cause intense pain or pleasure to be the clearest and truest ones. These tend to be the most visible, don't they?
They do.
And when this happens, the soul is most fully captivated by the body.
Why do you say that?
Because each pleasure and each pain is like a nail that rivets the soul to the body. They capture it and make it believe whatever the body affirms to be true. In thus agreeing with the body and having the same delights, it is forced to have the same habits and appetites. For this reason, it is no longer pure when it departs for Hades, but is contaminated by the body. Soon it sinks into another body where it germinates and grows, having no communion with what is divine, pure, and unified.
Socrates, what you say is true.
This is why those who genuinely desire to know are dutiful and brave, rather than what most people say is the cause. Do you disagree?
No, I agree with you.
This is how the philosopher's soul analyzes the matter. It will not ask philosophy to free it so it can turn around and submit to pleasures and pains that will put it back in prison, like Penelope weaving and unweaving her web. No, it will calm the stormy sea of passion and follow reason, contemplating what is true and divine, not a mere matter of opinion, and nourishing itself on that food alone. This is how it will live, and after the body dies, it hopes to join what is most like it and be freed from human troubles. Simmias and Cebes never fear that a soul that has been nourished in this way and has followed these pursuits will, after leaving the body, be scattered by the wind and be blown away, becoming nothing and being nowhere.
When Socrates had finished speaking, it was quiet for a long time. Most of us, including Socrates, were deeply absorbed in what had been said. Only Simmias and Cebes were talking quietly to each other. After a while, Socrates noticed them.
Well, what do you think of what we have said so far? Is something still missing? Anyone who wants to analyze it more fully can find a lot to challenge and reconsider. If you are talking about something else, I won't interrupt you. But if you still have doubts about it, please tell us exactly what you think. We would be delighted to hear whatever you might suggest. If you think there is anything I can add, Please let me join your discussion.
Socrates, it is true that we have both had doubts for some time, and we have been urging each other to question you, but we hesitated to ask, thinking it might be painful for you in the present circumstances.
Simmias, it will be hard to persuade other people that I do not consider my present situation to be unfortunate. If I am unable to convince even you, and you fear that I am more anxious now than at other times. You seem to think that I am less capable as a prophet than the swans who, when they sense that they are going to die, sing more and better than ever, rejoicing because they are on the way to join the God whom they serve. Because human beings are afraid to die, they falsely think that the swans are singing a final lament. They do not realize that no bird sings when cold or hungry or in pain, not even a nightingale, a swallow, or a hoopoe. I do not think that they sing from sorrow any more than swans do. Because they are sacred to Apollo and have the gift of prophecy, they anticipate the good things that await them in Hades and sing on that day more than ever before. I serve the same God alongside the swans. Like them, I have received the gift of prophecy. So I will depart from life no more despondent than a swan. So go ahead and ask anything you like, as long as the 11 Athenian judges allow.
Those are beautiful words, Socrates. First, I will tell you what doubts I have, and then Cebes can share his objections. I am sure that you agree that it is hard, if not impossible, to answer such questions in this life, but anyone who lacks the strength to examine them fully should be called a coward. Either we should learn the truth about such matters, or if that is impossible and we lack a divine revelation, we should select the best human account and let that be a raft on which we sail through life. Now, as you request, I will question you. I know I will blame myself in the future if I do not now say what I think. Socrates, when I consider what has come to light about what you said, it does not seem to be sufficient either for me or for Cebes.
You may well be right, my friend, but please tell me what you think is lacking.
Here is the problem. We might use a similar argument and claim that the harmony produced by a lyre is invisible, incorporeal, beautiful, and divine, whereas the lyre and its strings are made of particles of matter and are therefore like mortals. If someone smashes the lyre or cuts and breaks the strings, one who argues as you do might say that the harmony survives and will continue to exist. It would be impossible for the smashed lyre and broken strings to remain, and for the divine and immortal harmony to perish. The harmony certainly continues to exist somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay long before anything happens to it. Socrates, you must have considered the view of the soul that we hold. The body is held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, and so on, but that means the soul is no more than the harmony of these bodily elements when they are properly mixed. But if that is true, we must infer that when the strings of the body are too loose or are too tight because of disease or other problems, then the soul, no matter how divine, like other harmonies in music or in the other arts, must immediately perish. The material remains of the body may last for a long time until they are burned or decayed. If someone claims that the soul, which is a harmony of these bodily elements, perishes in what we call death, how could we answer that person?
As he often did, Socrates stared at each of us with his eyes open wide, and he smiled.
Simmias poses a reasonable objection. Perhaps one of you who is more capable than I am would like to answer him. But first, we should hear what Cebes has to say against the argument. That will give us time to reflect. When both of them have spoken, we may either agree with them if they seem to be telling the truth, or if not, we can argue against them. Now, Cebes, tell us what difficulty troubles you.
I will tell you. It seems to me that the argument remains where it was at the beginning, and it is open to the same objections. I'm willing to admit that you have ingeniously and sufficiently proved that the soul existed before it entered the body, but we have not proved that the soul exists after the body dies. My objection is not the same as that of Simmias. I am not inclined to deny that the soul is stronger and more lasting than the body. On the contrary, I think that in those respects the soul far surpasses the body. Well then, the argument says to me, why are you not convinced? Once you see that the weaker aspect still exists after the person dies, will you not admit that the more lasting aspect must survive during that same period of time? Like Simmias, I will use a simile. Please tell me whether you think it makes sense. Consider an old weaver who has just died. We might say that the weaver is not really dead, but must still be alive by indicating the coat that he had made and was still wearing, and pointing out that it is still whole and has not decayed. If people still do not believe us, we might ask whether the man lasts longer than the coat he is wearing. Once they admit that the man lasts far longer, we can claim to have demonstrated that the man is more lasting and has survived, arguing that even what is temporary still remains. But Simmias, you can clearly see this is not true. Everyone realizes that if we argue that way, we are talking nonsense. The truth is that the weaver has woven and worn out many such coats, and outlived several of them. But the last one outlived him. Of course, this does not mean that the man is weaker than his coat, or that he is inferior to it. We might think of the relation between the body and the soul in the same way. We can rightly say that the soul is lasting, and by comparison, the body is fragile and temporary. Every soul wears out many bodies, especially if the person lives a long time. While the person lives, the body changes and decays, yet the soul constantly weaves new clothes and repairs the damaged body. But when the soul perishes, it will be wearing its last set of clothes. They will outlive the soul. Once the soul is dead, the body will show its inherent weakness and will soon decay. Therefore, I would rather not rely on this argument to prove that the soul exists after death. Suppose we grant even more than you claim and say not only that the soul existed before birth, but also that after death the souls of some people still exist and are born and die again and again. Let's assume that the soul has a natural strength that will last and that it will be born many times. Even if this is so, we might still be inclined to think that the soul will eventually grow weary from the labor of successive births and finally die and utterly perish. The death and decay of the body that destroys the soul is unknown to us because we cannot yet have experienced it. Assuming this is true, then only a fool would be courageous in the face of death. Such confidence is justified if only we can prove that the soul is immortal and imperishable. Otherwise, anyone who is about to die will always have reason to fear that when the body dissolves, the soul will be completely destroyed.
After we heard that, as we later recalled, every one of us felt uncomfortable. We had been fully convinced by the previous argument, but now we were thrown into confusion and uncertainty. We not only distrusted the previous argument, but we began to question any future one. We might be bad judges, or it may be impossible to prove such things.
Phaedo, I strongly sympathize with your reaction. As you were speaking, I asked myself the same question. What argument can I ever trust? What could be more convincing than the argument Socrates presented and has now collapsed? I've always been attracted to the view that the soul is a harmony, and when it was mentioned, I remembered that it was my original belief. Now, I must begin again and look for another argument that will assure me that when a person dies, the soul does not also die. I beg you to tell me how Socrates responded. Did he share the discomfort you mentioned? Or did he calmly rescue his argument? Did he do so convincingly or not? Please, tell us what happened as accurately as you can.
Echecrates, I have always admired Socrates, but never more than at that moment. It is not surprising that he was able to answer these objections, but what amazed me was the gentle, pleasant, and approving manner with which he regarded the words of those young men. Then I was astonished by his quick understanding of the wound inflicted by their attack, and by his skill at curing it. He called us back from our defeat and our retreat, and urged us to follow him in examining the argument.
Well, how did he do that?
I suppose I am the best person to tell you, because I was sitting close to him on his right. I was on a low stool, and he was on a couch that was a good deal higher. As he often did, he played with my hair and smoothed my head, gathering the hair on my neck with his hand.
Phaedo, I suppose you will cut off those beautiful locks tomorrow.
Yes, Socrates, I suppose I will.
And not if you take my advice.
Then what should I do?
If this argument dies and we cannot bring it back to life, then you and I should both cut off our hair today. If I were you and could not stand up to the attacks of Simmias and Cebes, I would take an oath, as the Argives did, and vow not to let my hair grow again until I had fought and defeated them.
They say that even Heracles was not a match for two.
Then summon me, and I will be your Iolaus, until the sun sets.
I will call on you, not as Heracles summoning Iolaus, but as Iolaus summoning Heracles.
It is the same either way, but we must first take care to avoid a danger.
What danger?
The danger of becoming misologists is one of the worst things that can happen to us. Just as there are misanthropists, haters of humanity, there are also misologists, haters of dialectic. Both spring from similar causes. Misanthropy comes when you have too much confidence in a person you consider to be true, good, and trustworthy, and that person turns out to be bad and deceitful. Soon, this happens with another person and then another, and when it has happened several times, especially within your circle of trusted friends, then constant quarrels break out. Nobody can be trusted, and everybody is judged to be hateful and completely without merit. Perhaps you've seen this happen.
I have seen it often.
Well, isn't it unfortunate? The problem is that we often do not really know other people when we deal with them. If we did know them, we would understand that there are always some people who are good and trustworthy, some who are evil and deceitful, and that the vast majority lies somewhere between those extremes.
What do you mean?
I mean what you might say about very large and very small things. We seldom see a very large man or a very small man. The same is true of all extremes, whether we are considering things that are large or small, fast or slow, beautiful or ugly, black or white. This is true whether we select people, dogs, or anything else. The instances at the extremes are few, but those in the middle are many. Have you noticed this?
Yes, I have.
And don't you think that if there were a contest to determine who is the most evil, that those who are really evil would be few?
Yes, that is probable.
I agree. But I do not mean to say that arguments are like people in this way. You tempt me to say more than I intend to say. My point in making the comparison is that when people who lack skill in dialectic believe an argument to be sound and later decide that it is not, regardless of whether it really is, they tend to distrust reason itself, especially if this happens often. As you know, people who specialize in contradicting everything tend to think that they are the wisest because they alone understand that all arguments are unsound and unreliable. All things constantly change, like the currents in the Euripus, which are always rising and falling.
Well said.
Phaedo, if truth, certainty, and the power to know can be obtained, it would be too bad for people to become annoyed when what seems to be true turns out to be false, and to blame dialectic rather than blaming themselves and their lack of ability. It would be a shame to blame and hate reasoning, and thus lose the truth and never know what it is.
Yes, Socrates. That would be unfortunate.
Then we must never let into our mind the idea that there is no truth or that there are no sound arguments. It would be better to say that we are not yet sound, and that we must risk everything to become sound and wise. You and the others for the sake of living your life, and I because I'm about to die. Right now, I am in danger of not being a lover of wisdom, and, like uneducated people, only advocating my point of view. When such people argue, they do not care at all about the truth. They only try to convince those who are listening to believe what they believe. But I differ from them in that I am primarily interested in convincing myself, and only incidentally concerned about convincing them. My friend, consider how much I gain by this approach. See how greedy I am. If what I say is true, then I benefit from believing it. But if I am nothing after death, then in the short time that remains, I have at least avoided burdening my friends with lamentation and weeping. In that case, my ignorance will soon come to an end and will do no harm. Simmias and Cebes, I return to your arguments in this state of mind. I urge you to give little attention to Socrates and a lot of thought to the truth. Agree with me if you think I am telling the truth, but if not, oppose my enthusiasm with all your might so that I can avoid deceiving both of you and myself and, like a bee, leave my sting in you when I go. Now, let's continue. First, I would like to be sure I correctly remember what you said. As I recall, Simmias thinks that the soul is more beautiful and more divine than the body. But because the soul is a harmony, he doubts its immortality. He is afraid that it will die before the body does. On the other hand, Cebes grants that the soul lasts longer than the body, but he points out that nobody knows whether the soul might not wear out many bodies and cease to exist when it leaves the last one. This would constitute the final death and destruction of the soul, while the body, as we know, is constantly being destroyed. Simmias and Cebes, are these the issues we must examine?
Yes, those are the primary issues.
I agree.
Do you reject everything we said before, or only part of it?
Only part of it.
I agree.
What did you think of that part of the argument in which we said that learning is recollection and inferred that the soul must have existed somewhere before it was attached to the body?
I thought that was a wonderful argument, and I still do.
I cannot imagine changing my mind about that.
But you will have to change your mind, my Theban friend, if you continue to think that harmony is a complex thing, and that the soul is a harmony composed of bodily parts the way a lyre is made of strings. Surely you would not claim that a harmony could exist prior to the parts that compose the harmony. Would you say that?
Of course not. That would be absurd.
But, Simmias, you don't seem to realize that it is exactly what you are saying. You claim that the soul existed before attaching itself to a body and taking on human form. That would mean the soul was composed of elements that did not yet exist. Harmony is not what your analogy presents. The lyre, the strings, and the dissonant sounds exist first, and harmony is formed last of all, and is the first to perish. How can these two accounts of the soul be harmonized?
They cannot. They contradict each other.
And yet, an explanation of harmony ought to be harmonious.
Yes, it should be.
But there is no harmony between these two accounts, so you must choose. One says learning is recollection, and one claims the soul is a harmony. Which do you prefer?
The first one. Learning is recollection. The other one came to me without proof. It seems probable and is attractive to many people, but I am aware that arguments based on probability only pretend to prove what they claim, and unless we use great caution, they are apt to deceive us. This is true in geometry and in all other studies, but the principle that learning is recollection has been demonstrated by sound argument. The soul must have existed before it came to the body because it is the source of what exists in itself, what we call essences. Since I have been convinced by this conclusion on sufficient grounds, I must reject the view that the soul is a harmony and encourage others to do so.
Simmias, let's look at this matter from another perspective. Do you think that harmony or any other combination can be in a state or condition different from the elements from which it is composed?
Certainly not.
Can it do or undergo anything other than what they can do or undergo?
No.
Then a harmony cannot lead the elements that comprise the harmony, but follows them.
I agree.
So, harmony could not possibly make any motion or sound or have any other quality that is opposed to the parts that produced it.
That would be impossible.
Doesn't every harmony, by its very nature, depend on the arrangement of the elements that produce it?
I don't understand what you mean.
I mean that it is a matter of degree. It can be more or less harmonious, depending on how completely or how little the elements are harmonized.
That's right.
But does the soul admit of degrees? Is one soul more or less a soul than another? Or is any soul more or less completely a soul than another, even to a small extent?
No. Not at all.
But certainly we can say that one soul is intelligent, virtuous, and good, and another is foolish, immoral, and bad. Isn't that so?
Of course it is.
What will those people who claim that the soul is a harmony say about the presence of goodness or badness in the soul? Will they say that there is another harmony and another discord? Will they claim that the good soul is harmonized and, being a harmony, has another harmony within it, whereas the bad soul is inharmonious and has no harmony in it?
Well, I don't know what they would say, Socrates, but I suppose it would have to be something like that.
We have already agreed that no soul is more of a soul than another. But if we follow their hypothesis, we must presuppose that no harmony is more or less a harmony, or more completely a harmony than another.
True.
And whatever is no more or no less a harmony cannot be more or less harmonized.
Yes.
And that which is not more or less harmonized cannot have more or less harmony, but only an equal amount.
Yes, an equal amount.
Then, if one soul is not more or less a soul than another, it cannot be more or less harmonized.
Exactly.
Therefore, it does not have more or less harmony or more or less discord.
It does not.
Now, if goodness is harmony and badness is discord, and if no soul can have more harmony or discord than another, no soul can have more goodness or badness than another.
I agree.
Speaking more precisely, Simmias, if the soul is a harmony, it will never be bad, because if the soul is entirely a harmony, it could never have discord within it.
True.
Then it follows that a soul that is entirely a soul can never be bad.
Not if our assumptions are correct.
According to this line of reasoning, if the souls of all living beings are equally souls, they will be equally good.
Socrates, that conclusion follows from the argument.
But do you think this is true? Do you accept this conclusion that follows from the assumption that the soul is a harmony?
Definitely not.
Of all aspects of a human being, does anything but the soul rule, especially if it is a wise one? Do you know of anything else?
I do not.
Does the soul yield to the passions of the body or oppose them? For example, when the body is hot and thirsty, does the soul sometimes resist drinking? When the body is hungry, does the soul sometimes oppose eating? Are there not countless ways in which the soul opposes the body?
There are.
But we have already agreed that if the soul is a harmony, it could never emit a sound at odds with the tensions, relaxations, vibrations, and other movements of the strings that produce it. It could only follow. It could never lead.
Yes, we did agree on that.
We find that the soul often does the exact opposite, leading rather than following the elements of which it is supposed to be composed. Throughout life, the soul opposes and coerces in almost every way, sometimes inflicting severe pain and punishment, as in medicine and gymnastics. At other times, it is gentler, threatening and warning passions, desires, and fears as if they were something separate from the soul. Homer, in the Odyssey, presents Odysseus speaking this way. He beat his breast and thus reproached his heart. Endure, my heart. Far worse hast thou endured. Do you think that Homer wrote this, thinking that the soul is a harmony produced and led by the passions of the body, rather than leading them and ruling over them? Something far more divine than a harmony.
By the gods, Socrates, I think he considered the soul as leading and ruling.
Then, my friend, it would never be right to say that the soul is a harmony, because that would contradict the divine Homer, as well as ourselves.
True.
So much for your Theban goddess Harmonia, who has been gentle with us as we have examined the first issue. But now, Cebes, what can we say to appease her husband, Cadmus?
I'm sure you will find a way, Socrates. You have certainly answered the argument about harmony wonderfully, and in a way I could not have anticipated. When Simmias raised his objection, I was sure that there was no way to answer him, but it could not even survive your first attack. Now, I will not be surprised if Cadmus' argument suffers a similar fate.
My friend, be careful not to boast so that some evil spirit does not upset the argument I am about to present. However, we will leave that up to the god. I will approach the adversary in Homeric fashion and test the power of your objection. First, I will summarize your concern. In order for a philosopher to be confident in the face of death and not be thoughtless and foolish, you want proof that the soul is indestructible and immortal. Only then can we be confident in facing death and sure that living a philosophical life, rather than some other kind, will better prepare us for life in the world beyond. And you say that demonstrating that the soul is strong and divine, and that it existed before we were born as humans, does not prove immortality. Even if we grant that the soul is long-lived and has known a lot and done many things before our birth, that would not make it immortal. Entering into human form may be a kind of disease, the beginning of its dissolution. After enduring all the toil and trouble of this life, it may finally perish in what we call death. Whether it enters into the body only once or many times provides no comfort for the fear we have as individuals. It is natural for anyone but a fool to fear death unless we know and can prove that the soul is immortal. This is what I think you are saying, Cebes. I repeat it so that nothing will escape us and to give you a chance to add or subtract anything you wish.
You have properly expressed my position. I do not want to add or subtract anything.
This is not a trivial inquiry you are proposing, Cebes. It requires a complete examination of the causes of creation and destruction. If you wish, I will tell you what happened to me concerning this subject, and then you can use anything you find helpful in trying to resolve your difficulty.
I am eager to hear what you have to say.
Then listen to this. When I was young, I was extremely eager for the kind of knowledge called natural science. I thought it would be wonderful to know the causes of all things and to understand why things are created, why they are destroyed, and what they really are. I was constantly challenging myself with questions such as these. Do heat and cold bring about the formation of animals by some sort of fermentation? Do we think by means of blood, or air, or fire? Or perhaps it is none of those but the brain that provides sensations by which we are able to see, hear, and smell. Perhaps memory and opinion come from such perceptions, and knowledge is formed when they become stable. Then I went on to examine how these things cease to exist. I contemplated the heavens and the earth. But I finally concluded that I am totally unfit for such inquiry. I think I can explain why. These studies blinded me to the things I and other people thought are quite certain, and I forgot what I previously believed I knew. For example, I once believed that eating and drinking cause humans to grow, that substances like meat add flesh and bone adds bone to our bodies, and that other foods contribute likewise in complementary ways, and that they add mass to make a small person become larger. Does that make sense, Cebes?
Yes, I think that is reasonable.
Let me continue. I once thought that I adequately understood the meaning of more and less. When I saw a tall man standing next to a short one, I thought he was taller than the other by a head. The same is true of a horse. One is taller than another by a head. It was even more obvious to me that 10 is 2 more than 8, and that a 2-foot length is more than 1 foot because it exceeds it by half.
What do you think about such matters now?
Now I am a long way from supposing that I know the cause of any of these things. When 1 is added to 1, I do not dare to say whether the 1 that is added or the other 1 becomes 2. Nor would I claim that the 2 added together become 2 because of the addition. I am amazed that when they are separated from each other, each of them is 1 and not 2. But now, when they are brought together, the mere juxtaposition causes them to become 2. Nor can I understand how, by dividing 1, we make 2, since that is the opposite of what happened before when adding and combining was the cause of 2. Now, subtracting and separating makes 2. So I no longer pretend to know by this method of inquiry why 1 or anything else exists, or how it is created and destroyed. All I have left to rely on is a confused method of my own. Then, one day, I heard someone reading from a book that he said was by Anaxagoras. It claimed that mind arranges and causes everything. I was delighted by this idea of cause, which seemed to be correct, and I said to myself that if mind arranges everything, then it does so according to what is best. This means that if we wish to find out what causes the existence or the creation and destruction of anything, we must simply inquire about what is best for that particular thing. What is best for it to exist, to act, or to be acted upon. Therefore, it would be inappropriate for us human beings to inquire about anything other than what is best for ourselves and for anything else. And then we will also know what is worse, since they are both part of the same inquiry. I rejoiced to think that I had found in Anaxagoras a like-minded teacher about the causes of things. And I supposed he would be the first to tell me whether the earth is flat or round, and then would explain what caused it and why it is necessary. Then he would surely explain the nature of what is best and why this is the best arrangement. If he said that the earth is in the center, I expected him to explain why this is so. Then I would not seek any other cause. After that, I planned to ask about the sun, the moon, and the stars. What is their relative velocity, their way of revolving, and their other movements? Why is it best for each of them to act or be acted on in this way? I could not imagine that because he said mind arranges everything, that he would give any explanation other than that this is the best way. And I thought that once he had explained in detail the cause of each as well as the common cause of all of them, he would then account for what is best for each and what is best for all. I would not have exchanged my hope for a lot of money, so I quickly acquired his books and read them as fast as I could so that I might find out what is best and what is worse. CB's my friend. This wonderful hope soon flew away and disappeared. As I proceeded, I found that the man did not attribute to mind any genuine role in organizing things, but appealed to air, ether, water, and many other strange things as the real causes. It was as if someone said that Socrates does everything he does with his mind. But when asked to explain any particular action, such as why I am currently sitting here in prison, responded by saying that I am sitting here because my body is made up of bones and tendons, that the bones are hard and have ligaments that connect them, and that the tendons are elastic and cover the bones, which are also covered by flesh and skin. As the bones are lifted at their joints by the contraction or relaxation of the muscles, it is possible to bend my limbs, and that is why I am sitting here with my legs bent. That is what he would say, and he would explain my talking to you in a similar way. He would attribute that to sound and air and hearing, and he would list 10,000 other causes of the same sort, forgetting to mention the true cause, which is that the Athenians thought it best to condemn me, and I thought it is best to sit here, and it is right to endure the penalty they imposed. By the dog of Egypt, I am inclined to think that these muscles and bones of mine would have gone off to Megara or Boeotia long ago, guided by the idea of what is best, if I had not decided that it is better and nobler to accept the sentence inflicted by the state rather than escape and run away. It is absurd to call such things causes, but it would be right to say that without bones and tendons and other parts of the body, I could not carry out my decisions. But to say that those are the causes of what I am doing, that I'm doing it with reason but not by choosing what is best, is an extremely careless and sloppy way of talking. Imagine being unable to distinguish between the true cause and a condition without which it could not act. Many people talk that way, but they are groping around in the dark, applying the term cause where it does not belong. Thus, one person places a vortex around the earth to stabilize it and keeps it below the sky. Another one considers the earth to be a wide trough and places it on a pedestal of air. But they do not seek the power that arranges them in the best way, nor do they consider that power to proceed from what is divine. Rather, they expect to find another Atlas who is stronger, more lasting, and more encompassing. They do not suppose that what is true, good, and right binds and holds everything together. I would happily become the student of anyone who teaches about that kind of cause. But since I have been deprived of such a teacher and have been unable to discover it by myself, I will tell you about the next best way I have worked out for inquiring into the nature of causality. Would you like that, Seabees?
I would like that a lot.
As I continued my search, I thought that I should be careful not to blind my mind's eye the way some people ruin their bodily eyes by looking directly at the sun during an eclipse, rather than looking at an image of the sun reflected in water or similar material. I was afraid that my soul might be blinded if I looked at things with my eyes, or tried to grasp them with any of my other senses alone. I thought it would be necessary to appeal to reasoning when seeking reality and truth. But perhaps that comparison is not quite right, since I would not say that people who contemplate reality by reasoning are merely working with images. At any rate, that is how I proceed in every inquiry. First, I select the account of the matter that seems to be the strongest, and then I consider whatever agrees with it to be true, whether it concerns causality or anything else. Whatever disagrees with that account, I assume to be false. Maybe I should explain what I mean more clearly, because I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying.
No, Socrates, I definitely do not understand.
What I am about to say is not new. It is what I was saying earlier in this conversation, and what I say always and everywhere. In trying to explain the nature of causality, I will return to those familiar ideas and begin there. First, I assume the existence of beauty itself, goodness itself, greatness itself, and other such forms. If you will grant that, then I hope to show you the nature of causality and that soul is immortal.
I do grant that, so please go ahead.
Then consider my next step and see whether you think it is a good one. I think that if anything is beautiful other than beauty itself, then it can only be beautiful because it takes part in beauty itself. And I would say the same of everything else. Do you agree with this idea of causality?
I do agree.
I simply do not understand those clever causes the others have proposed. If someone tells me that bright color or a certain shape makes something beautiful, I ignore such explanations because they confuse me. I simply, and perhaps naively, hold with confidence the view that nothing makes anything beautiful other than the presence or participation of beauty itself, in whatever way that comes about. I do not pretend to know how it happens, but I am confident that it is beauty that makes all beautiful things beautiful. That seems to be the most reliable answer I can give to myself and to others. As long as I hold to it, I am confident it will remain firm and secure. I think it is safe for me and everyone else to answer that it is by beauty that beautiful things become beautiful. Will you agree with that?
I will.
It is by largeness that large things become large, and even larger things become larger. By smallness, smaller things become smaller.
Yes.
So you would not accept the claim that one person is taller than another by a head, or that another is smaller because of a head. You would strongly maintain that you only mean that the larger is larger because of largeness, and that the smaller is small because of smallness. In this way, you would avoid saying that the larger is larger and the shorter is shorter because of the head, which they both have. And you would also avoid the monstrous absurdity of saying that the larger person is larger because of a head, which is a small thing. Would you not be afraid of saying that the large is large because of the small?
Yes, I would be afraid of
And
that.
I assume you would also be afraid to say that 10 exceeds 8 because of 2. But you might be willing to say that it is because of its number. You might also say that 2 feet exceeds 1 foot by its magnitude rather than that it does so by a half. The same problem exists in both cases.
That's true, Socrates.
I think that you would also avoid claiming that adding 1 to 1 or dividing 1 is the cause of 2, and that you would loudly proclaim that you know of no way by which anything comes into existence other than by sharing in its own essence. The only cause of 2 is participating in duality. That is the only way to make 2, and by participating in unity is the only cause of 1. You might say that you will avoid answers involving division, addition, and other such refinements, and be happy to leave them to people who are wiser than you are. Because of your inexperience with such matters, you would be afraid of your own shadow, as the saying goes, and choose that trustworthy principle we have just identified. If anyone were to question that hypothesis, you would dismiss those objections and not answer until you have a chance to see whether the consequences that follow from it agree or disagree with one another. And if you were required to justify the principle itself, you would do that by assuming a higher principle, not stopping until you find the best one. But if you think through this matter, you would not confuse the principle and its consequences, as debaters do, not if you wanted to discover what is real. Those people never think about or even care about reality. They are so clever that they are satisfied with themselves even when they mix everything up. But I think you love wisdom and will do what I have just said.
What you say
Socrates,
is
I
true.
agree with you.
By the gods, Phaedo, it was reasonable for them to agree with Socrates. What he said was wonderfully clear to anyone who has even a little intelligence.
That's right. And everyone who was present thought so, too.
The same is true of those of us who were not there and who are only beginning to hear about it now. But what did they say after that?
I think that after everyone agreed with Socrates about the existence of ideas and how individual things participate in them and get their names from them, Socrates began to question Cebes.
If you agree with this way of thinking, when you say that Simmias is taller than Socrates and shorter than Phaedo, are you not saying that both tallness and shortness are in Simmias?
Yes.
But speaking precisely, you would not say that Simmias exceeds Socrates because he is Simmias. It is rather because of his size. Similarly, Simmias does not exceed Socrates because Socrates is Socrates, but because Socrates has smallness when compared to the tallness that is in Simmias.
True.
And if Phaedo exceeds Simmias in size, that is not because Phaedo is Phaedo, but because Phaedo has tallness when compared to Simmias, who is shorter.
That is also true.
Therefore, Simmias is said to be both tall and short because he is in the middle, exceeding the shortness of one by his tallness and allowing the tallness of the other to exceed his shortness. I guess I'm talking like a book, but what I'm saying is true.
I agree with you, Socrates.
The reason I'm saying this with such precision is that I want you to agree with me not only in thinking that tallness itself will never be both tall and short, but also in thinking that tallness in us or in any other thing will never become shortness itself or ever be smaller than shortness. Instead, either it will retreat when its contrary advances, or it will vanish before its opposite appears. But it cannot accept or exhibit shortness and become its opposite. Even though I accept and exhibit shortness when compared to Simmias, I will continue to be the same short person I was before and that I am now. But The tallness in me has not become shortness, nor can the shortness in me become tall. No opposite can ever be what it is and simultaneously become its opposite. It either vanishes or retreats in the process.
That seems to be entirely right.
At this point, one of the listeners, I cannot remember who, jumped into the conversation and exclaimed that what had just been said is the exact opposite of what was argued earlier. The smaller comes out of the larger, and the larger comes out of the smaller. In other words, opposites are generated from opposites. Now we are saying this could never happen. Socrates turned his head to the speaker and listened. Then he replied,
I applaud your courage in reminding us of this. However, I don't think you understand the difference between what we said then and what we are saying now. What we were discussing before was the generation of specific things from their opposites. But now we are dealing with essences, which can never become their opposites, neither in nature nor in us. My friend, at that point we were talking about individual things that have opposite qualities and which get their names from those qualities. But now we are talking about the opposite qualities themselves, which provide the names of things and which can never be generated from each other. Cebes, does this objection trouble you?
No, Socrates, that objection does not trouble me now, but I confess that many things do concern me.
Then we fully agree that an opposite quality can never be opposite to itself.
Yes, Socrates, we fully agree on that.
Now, let's see if we agree on another point. Is there something you would call hot and something else you would call cold?
Yes.
Are they the same as fire and snow?
Definitely not.
Heat is not the same as fire, and snow is not the same as cold.
Certainly not.
And yet, to speak as I did before, when snow comes near heat, they will not continue to be snow and heat. The snow will either retreat or cease to exist.
That's right.
And fire, when cold comes near it, will either retreat or cease to exist. Fire cannot be fire and also be cold.
True.
Not only does the idea itself retain the name forever, but in some cases, something that is not the idea but always manifests its essence can also be called by that name. I will try to clarify this with an example. Consider odd numbers. We always call them odd, do we not?
We do.
But is this the only way we use the term odd? Are there not other things that have their own name but are also rightly called odd? Things that are not oddness itself, but are never without oddness. There are many examples of this, but let's begin with the number 3. We call it 3, but we also call it odd, which is different from being 3. This is also true of 5 and of every alternate number, each of which is odd, but not of oddness itself. In the same way, 2, 4, and the rest of that series are even, but they are not the same as evenness. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yes, Socrates, how can I deny it?
Now I think you can understand the point I'm trying to make. Not only do such opposites exclude each other, but they also exclude things that manifest those opposites. They reject any idea that is contrary to an essence they manifest, either departing or perishing when it advances. For example, the number 3, as long as it remains 3, will accept annihilation rather than become an even number. Is that not so?
Certainly.
But the number 2 and the number 3 are not opposites.
No, they're not.
Then not only do opposite ideas repel each other, but certain other things also reject the approach of opposites.
That's true.
Would you like to determine what these things are?
I would.
Well, Cebes, are they not those things that are forced by the essences they manifest, both to take their own form as well as the form of some opposite?
What do you mean?
I mean what I was just saying about the number 3. Things that are 3 must take the form of 3 and of odd.
Of course.
Because the number 3 manifests the idea of oddness, it can never admit the opposite idea.
Never.
Oddness determines its nature.
Yes.
And the opposite of odd is even.
Yes.
Then the idea of even will never be accepted by anything that is 3.
No, it will not.
3 has no share in even.
None at all.
Then the number 3 is uneven.
It is.
Now, let's return to the distinction between things that are not themselves opposites, but do not admit certain opposites. As in the case of 3, although 3 is not the opposite of even, it will never admit evenness, but always accepts its opposite. In the same way, 2 will never admit oddness, and fire will not accept coldness. I could provide many more examples, but these should suffice to support the following conclusion. Opposites will never accept opposites, and nothing that brings an opposite with it will ever accept the opposite of a form it manifests. Now, let's recall what we have said. There is no harm in repetition. The number 5 will never admit evenness, just as 10, the double of 5, will not admit oddness. 10 is not itself the opposite of oddness, but it rejects it. Fractions such as 1 1/2 and 1/3 cannot manifest the idea of the whole. Do we agree about that?
Yes, Socrates, I entirely agree with what you say.
Now, let's begin again. This time, please avoid the safe answer we formerly gave and follow my example by drawing on what we just agreed, to find another approach that is also safe. If someone asks what causes a thing to be hot, do not say heat. This is what I call a safe but uneducated answer. Fire would be a better response that we are now able to give. Or, if someone asks what causes a body to be diseased, instead of saying it is because of disease, you might reply that it is from fever. Rather than saying that oddness is the cause of odd numbers, you can now say oneness and so on. Is that enough to help you understand what I am after?
Yes, Socrates, that is enough.
Then answer this question. What is it that makes a body live?
Soul?
Is this always true?
Yes.
Then soul always brings it to life.
It does.
What is the opposite of life?
Death.
Based on what we have established earlier, is it safe to say soul will never admit the opposite of what it brings?
It is safe to say so.
What did we call the idea that does not admit the form of the even?
The odd?
What about the forms that repel the musical and the just?
The unmusical and the unjust.
Well then, what do we call the form that does not admit death?
Immortal?
Does soul admit death?
No.
Then soul is immortal.
Yes.
Seabees, may we say that we have proved that this is so?
Yes, Socrates, we have proved it decisively.
Now, if the odd is necessarily imperishable, must not the number 3 also be imperishable?
Of course.
And if what lacks heat were necessarily imperishable, when heat attacks snow, must the snow not retreat whole and unmelted? Surely it could not remain as snow and admit heat.
That's true.
Similarly, if what is not cold were imperishable, then when fire is attacked by cold, it would not perish or be extinguished, but would retreat unaffected.
That necessarily follows.
Then, Seabees, we must be able to say the same of what is immortal. If the immortal is also imperishable, then soul, when it is attacked by death, cannot perish. Based on what we have just said, soul will not admit death or ever be dead, any more than the number 3 will ever be even or oddness will ever be even. Nor will fire or heat in the fire ever be cold. But someone might object that although oddness will never become even, the odd may perish and the even might take its place. We could not reply that the odd is imperishable, since we have not proved that. If that had been proved, then we would be able to say that when the even approaches, the odd and the number 3 depart. The same argument might also be applied to fire and heat and other such things. Do you agree?
I do.
The same can be said about what is immortal. If the immortal is also imperishable, then soul is imperishable as well as immortal. But if that is not the case, then some other proof of its imperishability must be given.
But, Socrates, no other proof is required. If the immortal, which is eternal, is able to perish, then nothing is imperishable.
Would everyone agree that the divine, the essence of life, and everything else that is immortal could never perish?
Yes, all humans would admit that. And I dare say the gods would even be more ready to agree.
If the immortal is indestructible, must not soul, which is immortal, also be imperishable?
Certainly.
When death attacks a person, it seems that the mortal aspect dies, but the immortal aspect escapes from death and is preserved safe and sound.
True.
Then, Cebes, soul is immortal and indestructible and will exist in Hades.
Socrates, I am convinced, and I have no more objections. But if Simmias or anyone else has any objections, this is the time to speak and not to be silent. I do not know how there could be a more appropriate time for this discussion.
I have nothing more to say, Socrates. The only problem is that this is such a vast topic, and human beings are so weak that I must confess I still have some doubts.
Yes, Simmias, I understand your concern. Our basic assumptions, even if they appear to be certain, should be examined carefully. Once they have been justified, then we might accept them with the kind of cautious confidence that is appropriate for human reason. Only then is it proper to stop searching.
That is true.
My friends, if the soul really is immortal, think of how we should care for it not only during our life, but for all time. And consider the great danger of not providing such care. If death were simply the end of everything, then it would be a great benefit to those who are dying. They would not only get rid of their body, but also of their soul and its evils. But now that it seems clear that soul is immortal, there is no release or protection from evil except by attaining wisdom and goodness. When a person's soul goes to the world beyond, it takes nothing along but its nurture and education, which may either greatly benefit or injure those who depart on their journey to the other world. They say that the spirit who guided us during our life also leads us to a place where the dead are gathered for judgment. From there we go to the world beyond, following the guide who has been appointed to lead us from this world to the other. Once we have received the judgment and remained there for the allotted time, another guide brings us back after many ages. Now this journey is not, as Aeschylus says in Telephus, a single and straight path. We would not need a guide for such a trip, and nobody could lose the way. Instead, I would say the road is winding, and it has many forks. We can infer this from the rituals and sacrifices that people on earth offer to the gods at places where 3 roads meet. A wise and well-ordered soul is conscious of its situation and follows the path. But the soul that desires the body and, as I said before, flutters around the corpse and clings to the visible world is forcibly carried away by its guiding spirit after considerable struggles and false attempts. If it is impure and has committed crimes such as willful murder, then everyone turns away and shuns that soul. Nobody will be its companion or its guide, so it wanders, bewildered and alone, until its appointed time when it is compelled to occupy a fitting habitat. By contrast, every pure and just soul that has passed through life is accompanied and guided by gods, and has its own proper place. Now, the earth has many wonderful regions. An authority I need not name has persuaded me that its nature and size is unlike what we usually hear from geographers.
What do you mean, Socrates? I have heard many descriptions of the earth, but I have no clue about the one you have in mind.
Well, Simmias, it does not require the art of Glaucus to describe it, but to prove that it is true would even be beyond his skill. I cannot do that, and even if I could, I fear my life would come to an end before I had finished. But I can tell you what I've been told about the form of the earth and its regions.
That will be sufficient.
First, the earth is round and lies in the middle of the heavens. It does not need air or any medium to support it because it is kept there and prevented from falling by the equilibrium with the surrounding heavens and by its own equipoise. That which is in equilibrium lies in the center of a homogeneous medium, so it will not incline to any degree in any direction, but will always remain in the same state and not deviate. Simmias, that is what I have come to believe.
And it is surely correct, Socrates.
I have also been told that the earth is immense, and that we who dwell in the region extending from the river Phasis to the Pillars of Hercules along the borders of the sea resemble ants or frogs in a marsh. We inhabit only a small portion of the earth, and many other people live in similar places. Throughout the earth are cavities of various forms and sizes in which water and mist and air collect. The earth itself is pure as is the sky, where we also find the stars. This is the firmament that most people who talk about such things call the ether. The water, mist, and air are the sediment from the ether that collects in the hollows of the earth. We who live in these hollows are deceived into thinking that we dwell above, on the surface of the earth, just as creatures living at the bottom of the sea might think that they live on the surface of the water and that the sea is the sky through which they see the sun and the other stars. Because they are sluggish and feeble, they have never lifted their heads or seen or even heard from someone who has seen this other region that is so much purer and fairer than their own. This is supposed to be exactly our situation. We dwell in a hollow of the earth and imagine that we are on its surface. We call the air the sky and fancy that the stars move in it. But this is because we are feeble and sluggish, never reaching the surface of the air. If we could reach the upper limit, or take wing like a bird and fly upward like a fish putting out its head and seeing the land, then we would see the world beyond. If human nature could sustain such a vision, we would acknowledge that this is the place of the true sky and the true stars and the true light. But the earth and stones and the entire region that surround us are spoiled and corroded, just as things in the sea are corroded by the brine. Nothing that grows in the sea is perfect or noble. It is filled with caves and sand and endless mud. Nothing can compare with the beautiful things of the region beyond ours, which is far superior to the one in which we dwell. Perhaps this is a good time for me to share a myth about that upper earth that lies under the firmament.
Yes, Socrates, it is a good time, and we would be delighted to hear it.
Then, my friend, this is what it tells us. To begin with, the earth, when seen from above, is like one of those balls covered with 12 pieces of leather, each with its own color, similar to the colors painters use on earth, but there they are brighter and clearer. The whole earth is composed of them. One part is a beautiful purple, another a radiant gold, and another one a white that is whiter than any chalk or snow. There are other colors as well, more numerous and more beautiful than any the human eye has seen. Even the cavities of the earth that are filled with air and water appear as a light flashing among the various colors, and they have a color of their own that provides a kind of unity to the variety the earth displays. In this beautiful region, everything that grows, such as trees, flowers, and fruits, transcends what we see here. The mountains contain stones that are more beautiful in color than our precious emeralds, jaspers, carnelians, and other such gems that are only fragments of what is found there, where all stones are like our precious stones, but even more beautiful. The reason is that in that region everything is pure, and not as in our region, corroded by brine and infected by rot and disease in earth, stones, animals, and plants. The upper earth not only contains jewels, but also gold, silver, and other precious metals that are readily visible and abundant and found everywhere by those who are blessed to see them. Many animals and humans dwell there, some in a middle region and others around the air just as we live near the sea, and others live on islands near the continent around which the air flows. In other words, they use the air much as we use the water and the sea, because the ether is to them what air is to us. Their seasons are temperate. They have no disease. They live much longer than we do, and their sight, hearing, and understanding are superior to ours, just as air is purer than water and ether is purer than air. They have temples and sacred places where the gods really dwell. They hear the voices of the gods and their prophecies. They see them and receive answers from them and talk with them. They see the sun, moon, and stars as they really are. All of their other blessings are in harmony with these. Such is the nature of the earth as a whole and of the things that surround it. Many regions are said to exist in the cavities on the globe, some deeper and wider than ours, others deeper but with a narrower opening, and some shallower and wider. All of them have many holes and broad and narrow passages beneath the earth that connect them with each other. Vast tides of water flow into and out of them as in basins, and there are huge subterranean streams of perennial rivers, hot and cold springs, a great fire, great rivers of fire, and streams of both thin and thick mud, like the rivers of mud in Sicily and the lava streams that follow them. They fill the various regions into which they flow at any particular time. Inside the earth there is an undulation that moves everything up and down like a swing. Here's how it works. The largest chasm of all penetrates the entire earth, the one to which Homer refers in the Iliad. Far off, where is the inmost depth beneath the earth? Elsewhere, he and other poets call this place Tartarus. The streams flowing into and out of the chasm cause the undulation, and each one takes on the nature of the soil through which it flows. The reason the streams are always flowing in and out is that the water has no bed or a bottom, and thus is always surging and moving up and down. The surrounding wind and air do the same, following the flow of water here and there all over the earth, similar to the process of inhaling and exhaling when we breathe. Thus the wind oscillates with the water, producing frightful and irresistible blasts. When the water rushes into what we call the lower parts of the earth, it flows into those regions with the motion of an alternating pump. When the water leaves these regions, flows through subterranean channels, rushes back here and fills the hollows, then it forms seas, lakes, rivers, and springs. Once more it enters the earth, some making a long circuit into many lands, and some making only a short journey to a few places. Then it falls again into Tartarus, some of it going far lower than the place from which it arose, some going not much lower, but all ending below the point from which it started. Some bursts forth on the opposite side, some on the same side, and some winds round the earth like the coils of a serpent. After descending as far as possible, it always returns and falls into the chasm of Tartarus. The rivers can descend only to the center because the land is steep on both sides. These rivers are many, mighty, and diverse. Of the four major ones, the greatest one is called Oceanus. It is on the periphery, and it flows around the earth in a circle. Acheron flows in the opposite direction, passing under the earth through deserted places into the Acherusian lake. The souls of most dead people go to the shores of this lake. After waiting a designated period of time, longer for some and shorter for others, they are sent back to be born again as living beings. The third river flows between the first two. Near its source, it pours into a vast region of fire, forming a lake larger than our sea, boiling with water and mud. It proceeds, muddy and turbid, and winds around the earth until it comes, among other places, to the Acherusian lake. But it does not mingle with the waters of the lake, and after it makes many coils around the globe, plunges into Tartarus at a lower level. This stream is called the Pyriphlegethon, which throws up jets of fire and lava in all sorts of places around the world. The fourth river emerges from the opposite side, first flowing through a wild and savage region, and is a dark blue color, like lapis lazuli, we are told, and is called the Stygian River, which forms Lake Styx. After falling into the lake and acquiring strange powers, it passes under the earth and winds around in the opposite direction to Pyriphlegethon and meets the Acherusian lake from the opposite side. The water of this river also mingles with no other water, but flows in a circle and falls into Tartarus opposite Pyriphlegethon. The poets have named this river Cocytus. Such, then, is the nature of the other world. When the dead arrive at the place where their guardian spirit directs them, they are judged and sentenced according to whether they have lived a good and holy life or not. Those who are judged to have lived neither well nor ill go to the river Acheron, boarding the transportation provided for them, and are taken to the lake where they dwell to be purified of their evil deeds. They suffer penalties appropriate to the wrong they have done to others, and they are absolved. They also receive just rewards for the good they have done. But those who have committed great crimes and are judged to be incurable are rightly hurled into Tartarus, from which they never return. Those who have committed crimes that are great but pardonable, such as those who, in a moment of anger, have done violence to a mother or a father and have repented for the rest of their lives, or who have taken a life under extenuating circumstances, these are plunged into Tartarus to suffer for 1 year. At the end of the year, the wave casts them out. Those who have committed simple homicide return by way of Cocytus, and parricides and matricides by way of Pyriphlegethon. They are carried to the Acherusian lake, where they lift up their voices to beg the victims they have slain or wronged to have pity on them, receive them, and let them come out of the river into the lake. If they are successful, they emerge and their troubles end, but if not, they are returned to Tartarus and from there to the rivers. This cycle continues until they obtain mercy from those they have wronged. Such is the sentence passed on them by their judges. Those who are judged to have lived especially holy lives are released from this prison and sent to dwell above in their pure home on the surface of the earth. And those who have sufficiently purified themselves with philosophy are able to live entirely without the body in dwelling places that are hard to describe and of which I do not have time to tell. Simmias, in light of all this, think of how important it is to obtain wisdom and goodness during our lifetime. The prize is beautiful and the hope is great. Of course, no thoughtful person will take what I have just said about souls and their habitat as literally true. But as we have seen, soul is immortal, so we may take the risk of believing that something like this is true, comforting ourselves with such stories as if they were magic charms. It is a noble venture, which is why I have given so much time and attention to this myth. So, I say that we should be confident about our soul if we have ignored the pleasures and ornaments of the body as alien to our true nature and more likely to do harm than good. Those who have sought the pleasures of knowing in this life and adorned the soul with her proper jewels, which are moderation, justice, courage, freedom, and truth, will be ready to travel to Hades at the proper time. You, Simmias and Cebes, and all other human beings will eventually make that journey. To me, as a tragic poet might say, the voice of fate calls now. Soon I must drink the poison. So I think it would be best to bathe now and save the women the trouble of washing the corpse.
Socrates, my friend,
Yes, Crito. What is on your mind?
do you have any instructions for us? Do you have anything to say about your children? Is there something else we can do for you?
I have nothing new to say, Crito. As I've always said, above all, you should take good care of your own self. In that way, you will also benefit my family and me. Do not make new promises, because if you neglect yourselves and do not follow the path we have marked out in this dialogue and in the previous ones, nothing you say now will be worthwhile.
We will do our best, Socrates. But tell me, how should we bury you?
In any way you please, if you can catch me and I don't escape your grasp. My friends, I cannot seem to convince Crito that I am still the same Socrates who has been talking and formulating arguments. Crito imagines that I am the corpse he will soon see, so he asks how he should bury me. Even though I have spoken many words to explain that once I drink the poison, I will leave here and go to savor the joys of the blessed. Those words, with which I comforted you and myself, seem to have had no effect on Crito. Therefore, I want you to provide an assurance to Crito that is the opposite of the guarantee he gave the judges at my trial. He promised the court that I would remain and not flee. But I want you to assure him that I will not remain, but will escape. If you do that, he will suffer less when I die and not grieve when he sees my body being burned or buried and think that I am suffering terribly. Don't let him say at the funeral that he is laying out Socrates, carrying Socrates to the grave, or burying Socrates. False words are not only bad in themselves, but they also infect the soul with badness. Dear Crito, have courage and say that you are only burying my body. With that, you can do whatever is customary and as you think best.
After he said that, Socrates got up and went to another room to bathe. Crito went with him, telling us to wait. So we waited, talking and reflecting on what had just been said. We also spoke of our great sorrow. Socrates was like a father to us, and without him we were about to spend the rest of our lives as orphans. When he had taken his bath, his actual children were brought in. Socrates had 2 young sons and an older one. The women of his family also came, and he talked with them and Crito. Socrates gave them a few instructions, and then sent them away. Then he returned to us. The sun was about to set, since he had spent a long time in the other room. When he came out from the bath, he sat with us, but not much was said. Soon the jailer who serves the 11 judges came in and spoke to Socrates.
Socrates, you are the noblest and the gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place. I know I will not have to scold you for getting angry with me, as so many others do, when I tell them to drink the poison. They rage and swear at me, but I am only following orders from the authorities. You know that it is they who are responsible for it, not I. You are well aware of the message I bring. But I also wanted to say farewell. Try to bear what is inevitable as lightly as you can.
I return your good wishes, and I will do as you say. My friends, what a kind man he is. Since I have been in prison, he has come frequently to see me and talk with me. He was always good to me, and now he generously weeps for me. Crito, We must do as he says. If the poison is ready, let him bring the cup. If not, tell him to prepare it.
Socrates, the sun is still in the hills. Many people delay taking the poison, and even after the announcement has been made, they eat and drink and even enjoy intimacy with those they love. Do not hurry. There is still some time left.
Yes, Crito, and the people of whom you speak are right in doing that, because they think they will benefit from the delay. But I am right in not doing that, since I do not think anything will be gained by waiting to drink the poison. I would have to laugh at myself if I tried to cling to life when it is already gone. So please, do not refuse and do what I ask.
Socrates had covered his face, but when he was beginning to grow cold in the area of his groin, he lifted the cover and spoke to Crito.
Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to make that offering?
The offering will be made. Is there anything else?
Socrates did not reply, but in a minute or two he moved. When the attendant uncovered him, his eyes were fixed. Then Crito closed his eyes and mouth. Such was the end, Echecrates, of our friend, whom I may truly call the wisest, best, and most righteous person I have ever known.